At 43, Alma Cade had nothing left but the coat on her back, a widow's grief she had learned to carry in silence, and $9 folded small and sweated soft in the toe of her boot. It was Silas Renn who owned the bank in Wren's Hollow and, by his own reckoning, most of the souls in it, who put her out, who called her husband's debts due the very week they lowered Jonah into the frozen ground, and who smiled when he did it, the way a man smiles when he believes God has arranged the world to suit him. With those $9, she did the only foolish, hopeless thing left to a woman with nowhere to sleep. She bought the ruined Thornevale Sawmill on the banks of the Sable River, sold off at the county steps for $8 and no bidders but her, a rotting shell the whole town swore was worth less than the nails holding it. What none of them knew, what Alma herself did not yet know, was that behind the warped shelves of that dead mill's office, sealed and waiting through long years of dust, lay something that would not only lift one broken woman from the mud, but give a forgotten town back its heart. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Alma Cade. If you are watching tonight from a place the world has written off, from a town the maps forgot and the money left behind, stay with us a while and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, for this is a story about exactly such places and the quiet miracles they still keep hidden. Alma had not always been poor, though she would have told you plainly that she had never once been rich, not in coin. She was born Alma Teague in a low cabin at the far edge of Wren's Hollow, in the high timber country, where the Oregon mountains folded down toward the Sable. In the years when the town was young and hungry and full of the smell of fresh-sawn pine, her father, Ellis Teague, was a joiner and a fixer of things, a man who could look at a broken chair or a stopped clock or a wagon with a cracked hub and see, plain as daylight, the small hidden fault that had brought the whole thing low. He taught Alma before she could properly read that nothing was ever truly worthless, that the world was forever throwing away good things because it had not the patience to understand them. He would bring home the discards of richer folk, a warped table, a rusted lock, a music box gone silent, and he would set them on the bench between them and say, in his slow, certain way, that everything ruined was only something misunderstood, and that the eyes God gave a person were meant for seeing what others had stopped looking at. Alma took that lesson into her marrow. By the time she was 12, she could mend a lock blind, by feel, listening to the tumblers the way other children listened to birdsong. Her mother, Ruth, taught her the other half of what she would need. Ruth Teague had a straight back and a soft voice and a way of moving through hardship as though it were only weather, to be endured and outlasted, and never, ever complained of before company. When the fever went through the hollow, the winter Alma was 15 and took 2 of her brothers. It was Ruth who kept the household standing, who cooked and washed and sat up nights, and who told Alma, holding her by both shoulders in the gray dawn after the second small grave was dug, that grief was a debt you paid a little each day, and that the paying of it was itself a kind of love, and nothing to be ashamed of. Alma remembered that too. She had cause to. She married Jonah Cade at 20, a lean and gentleman who ran a small freight team hauling lumber down from the mills to the valley towns, and for a while, a good long while, the two of them made the kind of plain, unspectacular life that no ballad is ever written about, and no one misses until it is gone. They never had children, though they wanted them. That was the one grief Alma did not speak of, not even to Ruth before Ruth passed. Not even to the empty house on the nights Jonah was away on the road. Instead, she poured herself into the work of their hands. She kept the books for Jonah's little freight concern, and she kept them well in a clean, careful column hand. And she came to understand better than most men in that town who fancied themselves shrewd how money truly moved, who owed what to whom, and how a debt, quietly and patiently arranged, could become a leash around a neighbor's neck. She did not use that knowledge to harm anyone. She simply saw it. Her father had taught her to see, and she learned, in those years, the one skill that would matter most of all, though she could not have known it then. She learned the sawmill. Jonah hauled for old Elias Thorne, the millwright who had built Thornevale with his own hands, back when the town was raw, and Alma often rode along on the loading days and lingered in the great cool shadow of the mill while the men worked. Elias took a liking to the quiet woman who asked real questions, and he showed her things: how to read the grain of a log before the blade ever touched it, how to tell heart pine from sapwood by the weight and the ring of it, how the whole roaring machine of a water-powered mill came down in the end to one gentle secret: the steady, patient turning of the wheel in the race, the way the river's slow strength was gathered and made to sing. "A mill's like a person, Mrs. Cade," old Elias told her once, wiping sawdust from his white brows. "Ain't the loud part that matters. It's the quiet part underneath, the part that keeps turning when nobody's watching." She did not forget that either. She was a woman who forgot very little, which is a hard gift to carry, and sometimes, in the years that came, a saving one. The fall, when it came the way such things always come in the high country, slow, then all at once. Old Elias Thorne died in his sleep in the hard winter of 1884. And with him died something in the town that no one quite named. His heirs were scattered and quarrelsome, and lived far off in the east. And while they wrangled over the estate by mail, the great mill sat idle, its wheel frozen in the race, its blades gathering rust. Into that idleness stepped Silas Renn. Wren had come to Wren's Hollow a decade before with a black coat and a soft handshake, and a genius for arriving exactly when a man was weakest. He had bought the failing general store, and then the assay office, and then the mortgage on half the farms in the valley. And by the time old Elias was cold, Wren held paper on nearly everything that mattered. And he wore the town the way another man wears a watch chain, lightly and with pride. He wanted the Thornevale Mill, and he set about getting it in his patient, smiling way, letting it rot so its price would fall, whispering to the county that the water rights were tangled and the timber leases lapsed, and the whole concern a hazard best, let go cheap. What Wren understood, and what the town did not, was that whoever held that mill held the mill race, and whoever held the mill race held the Sable, and whoever held the Sable held the throat of every farm and every ambition in Wren's Hollow. Water is the true coin of dry country. Wren meant to own it all. He might have too, but for Jonah Cade dying first. Jonah's team went over on the ice of the Sable Road in the black of a February night, hauling a load he should never have taken in weather he should never have driven, taking it because Wren's bank had called a note early and there was no other way to raise the money. They found him at first light, the horses screaming and the wagon on its side and Jonah beneath it, gone. And when Alma, dry-eyed and swaying, went to the bank 3 days after the burying to beg a little time, Silas Renn folded his soft hands on his clean desk and told her, gently, that the note was the note, that business was business, that a woman alone could not be expected to run a freight concern, and that the kindest thing, he used that word, kindest, was for her to sign the whole of it over to him and start fresh somewhere else. She signed. There was nothing else to sign. He took the house, the barn, the team that survived, the little freight concern she had built the books of with her own careful hand, and he did it all with the law tucked neat in his pocket, and he did it smiling. When she walked out of that bank into the March mud, she owned her coat, her boots, her father's old set of small tools wrapped in oilcloth, and $9 she had hidden even from Jonah, saved a coin at a time, against exactly such a day. The town watched her go. Some looked away in shame, most simply looked away. She slept 3 nights in the old freight barn that was no longer hers, before Wren's man came to run her off. And it was on the 4th day, cold and lightheaded with hunger, that she stood at the courthouse steps and watched the county auction off the dead Thornevale Mill for back taxes, and heard the auctioneer's voice fall flat into a silence. No man in that crowd fool enough to buy a rotting hulk on tangled water rights with Silas Renn standing right there in his black coat, watching to see it fall to him for a song. And Alma Cade, 43 years old and owning nothing, heard her father's voice, as clear as if he stood beside her. Everything ruined is only something misunderstood. And she stepped forward before she had rightly decided to, and she said, in a voice that carried across the whole square, $8. The auctioneer blinked. Wren turned his head slowly, the way a hawk turns. The gavel came down, and the laughter started somewhere at the back and rolled forward through the crowd like a cold wind off the river. The whole town of Wren's Hollow laughing at the widow Cade, who had just spent her last dollars but won on a dead mill that would surely be her grave. She did not laugh. She did not weep. She walked down to the Sable with her deed in her fist and her $9 down to $1, and she looked at the thing she now owned, and she began, in the way her mother had taught her, to endure. The Thornevale Mill was worse up close than it had looked from the road. The great roof had opened in 3 places and let the winters in. Birds nested in the high beams, and their droppings whitened the idle saw. Carriage. The mill race was choked with 2 years of leaves and drowned branches, and the wheels stood locked in a green skin of slime. Alma spent her first night in the mill office, a low room at the river end, walled floor to ceiling, on its long side with heavy shelving that old Elias had built for his ledgers and his patterns, and the 1,000 small stores a working mill accumulates. She built a small fire in the rusted stove and ate the last of the bread a kind farm woman had pressed on her, and she slept, sitting up against those shelves, and in the morning she started to work with the only wealth she had left, which was her hands and her father's eyes. She cleared the race first, because Elias had taught her that a mill was its water. For 4 days, she hauled sodden branches and rotted leaves from the channel until her palms bled and scarred and toughened. And on the 5th day, working a stubborn jam near the wheel, she found the first thing that did not belong. It was a small brass key, green with age, wedged in a joint of the sluice gate where no key had any business being, tied to a scrap of oiled leather on which someone had scratched 2 words with a nail. For after. She sat back on her heels in the cold water with the key in her red hand and turned it over and over. Elias Thorne had hidden a key in his own mill race, in a place only a person who cleared the whole channel by hand would ever find it. A person, that is, who understood the mill the way he had, who honored its quiet turning part. For after, the leather said. After what? She did not know, but her father's blood was up in her now. The old joiner's hunger to find the small hidden fault, the one thing misunderstood, and for the first time since Jonah died, she felt something in her chest that was not grief. It was curiosity. It was, though she'd have been ashamed to name it so soon, hope. She carried the key back to the office and tried it in every lock she could find, the tool chests, the pattern drawers, the strongbox bolted under the desk that Wren's men had already pried open and found empty, and it fit. None of them. It was late, and she was near to weeping with the frustration of it, when she leaned her aching back against the great shelf wall and felt, through her shirt, something she had not felt before. A seam of cold air, a thin, steady breath, of it, sliding out from behind the shelves where no draft should be. She stood very still. She had learned as a girl to trust the small, wrong things, the tumbler that gave differently, the note that rang false. She took up her lamp and went along that wall inch by inch, and behind the 3rd bank of shelving, low down, hidden by old Elias, behind a false back of pine boards fitted so cunningly that 10 years of Wren's men had never seen it, she found a keyhole. Green brass. A perfect match. Her hand shook so that she could barely fit the key. It turned with a sound like a held breath let go, and a whole section of shelving swung inward on hidden hinges. And Alma Cade lifted her lamp and looked into a room that no one living had seen for the length of a decade. The room was small and dry and strangely, achingly beautiful. And for a long moment Alma could only stand in the doorway and let the lamp shake in her hand. It was a workshop, Elias Thorne's true workshop, his secret one. The place he had gone in the last years of his life when the town thought he was only an old man growing strange and solitary. And it was full. Along one wall stood racks of lumber such as Alma had never seen even in a working mill. Quarter-sawn heart, pine and figured maple and dark walnut and pale spruce. Each board planed smooth and stacked with paper between and dated in Elias's crabbed hand. Some of it seasoning 20 years and more. Wood worth a small fortune to any man who knew what he was looking at, and worth more than that to the one who did. But it was not the lumber that stopped her breath. It was the thing that stood in the center of the room under a great sheet of oiled canvas, tall as two men, and when Alma drew the canvas away, the dust rose golden in her lamplight, and she found herself looking at a pipe organ, an entire church organ, hand-built, 3/4 finished, its rank of wooden pipes rising like a small forest, its case carved with wheat and river and pine, and a country hand so tender and so sure that she pressed her fingers to her mouth and wept, at last, standing there, wept the tears she had not let herself weep at Jonah's grave, because she understood all at once what she was looking at and what it meant. For there was a letter on the bench, weighted with a chisel, addressed in Elias's hand to whoever finds this room, and Alma read it that night by the failing lamp and then read it again by morning light, and she carried its words in her for the rest of her life. Old Elias had known he was dying. He had watched Silas Renn tighten his grip on Wren's Hollow year by year, watched the man bleed the farms and buy the store, and reach, always reaching, for the mill and the water beneath it. And Elias had made a quiet plan, the plan of a man who could not fight with a black coat and a soft handshake, but could fight, as he had lived, with his hands. He had spent his last strength building a gift the town could not sell, and Wren could not steal an organ for the church on the hill whose old one had burned, a thing of no cash value to a greedy man and infinite value to a living town, and he had hidden it, along with the finest of his wood, and, wrapped in canvas at the back of the room, a heavy, strong box, so that it would come to light only when the mill itself came into the hands of someone worthy, someone patient enough to clear the whole race by hand, sharp enough to feel a draft where none should be, someone, Elias wrote, who understands that a mill is not a machine for making money but a heart for making a town. And there was more in that letter, the part that made Alma sit down slowly on the sawdust floor, the true papers of the Thornevale Mill, the original deed and the water grant, kept here where Wren's lawyers had never found them, proving beyond any court's doubt that the mill race and its rights ran with the land and could not be severed and sold, that Silas Renn's whole tightening scheme, his patient decade of buying the town's water out from under it, stood on nothing at all, because the water had never been his to reach for, and never could be. The strongbox, when she opened it with the small key that hung inside on a ribbon, held gold, not a dragon's hoard, but enough, 40 double eagles bright as the day they were struck, and a note in Elias's hand that said simply, "Not for whoever finds this, but for what needs doing." Alma understood that too. She sat in that hidden room a long while, in the company of a dead man's kindness, and she thought about $9, and a barn floor, and a bank clerk's soft hands folding. And she thought about her mother, saying grief is a debt you pay a little each day, and about her father saying everything ruined is only something misunderstood. And she made up her mind about the whole of the rest of her life in the space of a single cold morning by the Sable River. She would not run with the gold, though she could have. She would not sell the wood and vanish, though a lesser grief would have let her. She would finish what Elias started. She would wake the dead mill, and she would give the town back its water and its work and its song, and she would do it in a way that left Silas Renn nothing to grip but the empty air he had always, in truth, been grasping. It did not stay secret long, of course. Secrets never do in a small town. And Alma did not truly try to keep this one, because a gift hidden helps no one. Word went round Wren's Hollow that the widow Cade had the mill turning again, that she had cleared the race alone and coaxed the great wheel back to life, and stood there in the spray the first morning it moved, laughing out loud like a girl. Farmers who needed lumber to mend the winter's damage came shy to her door, and she sawed for them fair and cheap, and paid a young man named Tobias Wren, great-grandson of the town's founder and idol since Wren foreclosed his father's shop, to learn the work at her side. She let it be known that she would take on any hand willing to labor, and slowly, then less slowly, the mill filled again with the smell of fresh pine and the sound of men whistling. And Silas Renn, who had watched the county laugh her onto his despised property, and thought no more of it, began to hear these things, and stopped smiling. He came himself, at last, on a bright, hard morning in early summer, in his black coat, in his fine buggy, and he stood in the mill yard among the singing saws with an expression Alma had seen on him only once before. Across a clean desk while she signed her life away, he offered to buy the mill. He named a figure that was, to a woman who 3 months before had owned $1, a staggering sum, and he said it the way he said everything, softly, reasonably, as a kindness. Alma wiped the sawdust from her hands and said no. He raised the figure. She said no again. And then Silas Renn stopped pretending, as such men always do when the softness fails them, and he told her plainly what he could do, that he held the notes on half the valley, that any farmer who milled his lumber with her would find his own credit gone dry, that he would see her water rights tied up in the county courts for 10 years if it took that she was one woman alone against the whole weight of what he had spent a decade building, and that she would be wise, very wise, to take his money and be grateful. The saws had gone quiet. Tobias and the other men had gathered close, and Alma could feel their fear, because Wren's threats were not idle. Every soul in that yard owed him something. She looked at the banker a long moment. Then she said, in that same voice that had carried across the auction square, that she thanked him for coming, and that he was welcome to try the county courts, and that he ought perhaps to look very carefully at the original water grant before he spent good money on lawyers, because she had it, the true one, in Elias Thorne's own hand, and it did not say what Silas Renn had spent 10 years telling everyone it said. And she watched the color go out of his face, and she knew, watching it, that she had won, though the winning was not yet finished. What Silas Renn understood in that moment, standing in the loud, sunny ruin of the plan he had thought so perfect, was that his whole grip on Wren's Hollow had never rested on iron but on ignorance, on the town believing the water was his to grant or withhold, the debts his to call, the future his to sell. And Alma, who had kept the books of a freight concern with her own careful hand and understood better than any man in that valley how a debt becomes a leash, had found the one paper that cut every leash at once. She did not gloat. She simply began, that very week, to undo him, and she did it not with the gold in the hidden strongbox, which she never once spent on herself, but with truth patiently applied. She took the original water grant to the county seat and had it recorded and copied and read aloud, and the farmers of the valley learned for the first time that the Sable's flow through the Thornevale race was a common right that ran with the mill and could never be sold to any bank that Wren had been quietly charging them. For years, for water he had no more claim to than the clouds. She took Elias Thorne's ledgers and set beside them her own clear reading of Wren's bank, and showed the town, gently and without cruelty, how the pattern of his foreclosures had followed the water, how a man had been squeezing a whole valley through a lie. She did not need to raise a mob. She only needed to let people see. Her father had taught her that the world throws away good things because it has not the patience to understand them. She gave Wren's Hollow the patience, and it understood, and it turned from Silas Renn the way a body turns from a splinter, quietly and completely, until there was nothing left for him in that town but the coldness of his neighbor's eyes. He was gone before the first snow, his bank sold, his black coat seen no more on the Sable Road. Undone, not by violence or by his own greed's exposure alone, but by one woman's refusal to be understood as worthless. And the gold, the 40 bright eagles that said, "Not for whoever finds this, but for what needs doing," Alma spent exactly as Elias had meant it. She hired every idle hand in Wren's Hollow to rebuild the mill roof and the race and the drying sheds, and she paid them in fair coin, and the money moved through the town the way water moves through dry ground, and where it passed, things grew. She finished the organ. All through that autumn, she worked on it in the evenings, after the saws fell silent, Tobias Renn beside her, the two of them teaching themselves from Elias's own careful notes how to voice a pipe and true a rank. And on a cold, clear Sunday just before Christmas, the men of the town carried it up the hill to the little church whose organ had burned a dozen years before, and set it in place, and Alma Cade sat down before the keys with her scarred and river-roughened hands, and played the first notes anyone in Wren's Hollow had heard from that hill in a decade. The whole town came. They stood in the snow outside the open doors because the church could not hold them all, and they listened to a sound that old Elias Thorne had built in secret against exactly this day, a sound made of the valley's own wood by the valley's own patient hands. And there was not a dry eye on that hill, and no one, not one soul, remembered laughing at the widow who bought a ruined mill for $8. Or if they remembered, they were ashamed, and the shame was itself a kind of prayer. So consider again where we began. On the day a woman of 43 owned nothing but the coat on her back and $9 folded into the toe of her boot, cast out by a smiling man who believed the world had been arranged for his convenience, laughed at by a whole town for spending her last coins on a dead mill by the Sable. Consider that the thing they mocked her for, saving, was the very thing that saved them all. That behind those warped shelves, in the dark, a dying craftsman's quiet faith had been waiting years for the one person patient enough to clear the whole river by hand and sharp enough to feel a cold breath of air where none should be. That is the meaning of what Alma Cade did, and it is worth saying plainly. The world is forever throwing away good things because it has not the patience to understand them, and every so often, a person comes along who was taught by a father at a workbench and a mother in a hard winter to look at the ruined thing and see the misunderstood one, to endure the mockery and clear the channel and turn the key. And when such a person finds what the greedy overlooked, she does not hoard it. She gives it back. She turns the quiet part underneath that keeps moving when nobody is watching, and a whole forgotten town remembers how to sing. "Settle in," we said, "and let us tell you the story of Alma Cade. Now you have heard it, and you will know her name. Thank you for staying with us to the end of this one, out there in the dark and the quiet, wherever you are watching from tonight. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the thing the world wrote off might yet be the thing that saves them. And before you go, sit a moment with us and answer, honestly, in the comments below, what is a time in your own life when you found real value in something everyone else had given up on? A place, a person, a purpose others were quick to laugh at? We read every one, and we hold them close. Until next time, from all of us to all of you, stay warm, stay patient, keep clearing your own channel, and stay close.